Have you ever continued doing something, even when you knew it wasn't worth it anymore? Maybe you sat through a movie you didn't enjoy, just because you had already paid for the ticket, or finished a meal you didn't like, simply because you ordered it. In those moments, you are not continuing because it makes sense. You are continuing because of what you have already spent. And without realizing it, that small decision reflects a much deeper pattern in human thinking. A pattern that quietly influences some of the most important decisions in our lives. This pattern is known as the sunk cost fallacy, a cognitive bias that affects how we make decisions. It occurs when we continue an action, not because it is beneficial, but because we have already invested time, money, or effort into it. A sunk cost is any past investment that is irrecoverable. No matter what you choose next, that cost cannot be recovered. In rational decision-making, these past costs should be ignored because they have no impact on what will happen next. And yet, instead of letting go of what is already lost, we allow it to influence what we do now. As a result, we often continue decisions, not because they are right, but because we do not want our past investment to feel wasted. In rational decision-making, choices should be based only on future outcomes, what you stand to gain, and what it will cost from this point forward. In economics, this is explained through marginal analysis, comparing the additional benefit of continuing with the additional cost required. If the future benefit is lower than the future cost, the rational decision is to stop. But the sunk cost fallacy disrupts this logic by giving importance to costs that are already gone. It also causes us to ignore opportunity cost, the value of the alternatives we give up, by continuing on the same path. So instead of asking, what is the best decision now, we ask, how do I justify what I have already spent? And that shift in thinking is where the problem begins. If the logic is so straightforward, why do we still fall into this pattern? The answer lies in how the human mind processes loss, responsibility, and consistency. First, loss aversion. We experience the pain of losing more intensely than the satisfaction of gaining. So instead of accepting a loss, we continue investing, hoping to reduce that discomfort. Second, the fear of waste. We are conditioned to believe that stopping midway means something has been wasted, so we continue, even when continuing creates a bigger loss. Third, commitment and consistency. Once we make a decision, we feel an internal pressure to stay consistent with it. Changing direction can feel like admitting we were wrong. And finally, escalation of commitment. The more we invest, the harder it becomes to stop. Each additional step makes turning back psychologically heavier. At this point, the decision is no longer driven by logic, but by the need to justify the past. Consider a simple situation. You are watching a movie, and halfway through, you realize it is not engaging. The story is weak, the pacing feels slow, and you are no longer interested. Yet, you continue watching. Now, move to a more personal context. A relationship that no longer feels fulfilling, but continues for years. Not because both people are growing, but because of the time, emotions, and memories already invested. And in a more significant decision, a career path that feels misaligned, yet continues. Because of the years spent studying, the degree earned, the effort already invested. In each case, the pattern remains the same. The decision is not being driven by present value, but by past investment. And as the stakes increase, the cost of this pattern becomes much more significant. This pattern is not limited to everyday decisions. It also appears in large-scale, high-stakes situations. A well-known example is the Concorde project, a supersonic passenger aircraft developed by the British and French governments. Despite clear evidence that the project would not be commercially profitable, funding continued for years. The reason was not future viability, but the massive investment that had already been made. Billions had been spent, and stopping the project would have meant accepting that loss. So instead of minimizing further losses, more resources were committed. This is often referred to as the Concorde fallacy, a classic case of continuing a failing course of action to justify past decisions. It demonstrates how even experienced decision-makers can be influenced by sunk costs. The sunk cost fallacy is not just a small error in thinking. It has real consequences. It leads to misallocation of resources. Time, money, and effort continue to flow into decisions that no longer provide value. Instead of minimizing losses, we increase them. Over time, this can result in significant loss of time that could have been invested in better opportunities. It also creates an emotional burden, frustration, regret, and a sense of being stuck. And perhaps most importantly, it reduces the overall quality of decision-making, because choices are no longer based on what is optimal, but on what feels justifiable. In the long run, this pattern does not protect past investments. It amplifies their cost. It is important to understand that not every decision to continue is a mistake. Persistence, in many situations, is necessary for success. If the future benefits still justify the future costs, continuing is a rational choice. The problem arises only when the decision is driven primarily by past investment. In other words, when we continue not because it makes sense now, but because we have already committed too much to stop. The key distinction is simple. Is the decision based on the future or anchored in the past? That difference determines whether persistence is rational or a result of the sunk cost fallacy. Avoiding the sunk cost fallacy requires a deliberate shift in how decisions are evaluated. First, apply zero-based thinking. Evaluate the situation as if no prior investment has been made. Ask yourself, if I were starting today, would I choose this again? Second, consider the opportunity cost. What are you giving up by continuing on the same path? Third, define exit criteria in advance. Set clear conditions under which you will stop before emotions become involved. This creates a decision boundary that is based on logic, not attachment. And finally, separate the decision from the past. What has been spent is already gone. What matters is what happens next. When decisions are anchored in the future, the influence of sunk costs begins to disappear. The sunk cost fallacy reminds us of a simple but often ignored truth. What is gone is gone. Time, money, effort, once spent, cannot be recovered. And holding on to them should not determine what you do next. Better decisions are made when we evaluate the present clearly and choose based on future value. Not to justify the past, but to improve what comes ahead. Take a moment and think, where in your life are you continuing simply because you have already invested too much? And if you were starting today, would you still choose the same path? If this made you reflect, consider sharing it with someone who might need it.